What's up, guys? So I got the chance to drive the Supercharged S2000 a little bit more. Sorry I haven't really been posting any in-car video. That'll be coming soon once I work out all the kinks. But that's actually what today's video is for. We're gonna address some of the smaller glaring issues, kind of work through them, and if you guys are having some of these problems or have a supercharged car or have link ECU, stay tuned and watch this video because we're gonna go through in detail and address a couple of drivability things that have just kind of been bothering me a little bit after finishing this car and doing some initial driving. So the first issue is a little bit hard to explain, and it took me a while to actually figure out what the problem was. But it's with my CAN bus gauge. So this is a Link branded CAN gauge, and this is actually made by Gauge Art, which is really Science of Speed here in Phoenix. So luckily I was able to go to their headquarters and we were able to do a little bit of troubleshooting. But the issue is when I try to connect to this gauge's Wi-Fi, this has its own Wi-Fi network, which you can connect to your phone to configure what parameters are actually displayed, right? Every time I try to connect, either it would have a weak signal or just drop connection when I do try to connect to its Wi-Fi network, and never got it to work. So we actually hooked this up to a bench setup at Science of Speed / Gauge Art, and of course the SSID for the Wi-Fi network was broadcasting fine, was able to connect my phone, whatever. So I'm pretty sure we determined that because the gauge is powered by the CAN bus network coming straight from the Link ECU, I don't think I have either enough voltage or amperage to fully power up this gauge to get the Wi-Fi module inside of this thing working. So I think the trick is going to be to split the CAN bus wiring and get the positive and negative separate and just directly power that to the gauge instead of going through the Link ECU's power, because apparently it isn't enough. So we're gonna address that today in the video. The second thing is I have about a 10 PSI pulley on this, and I'm seeing anywhere from like 9.2 to 9.5 PSI. And here in Phoenix, I'm pretty close to sea level. I think we're like, I don't know, 1,500 feet above sea level. So I should be hitting that target boost fairly easily. I did a boost leak test, and I did find the gasket for the throttle position sensor and the gasket for the actual throttle body had a little bit of a leak, so I have the gaskets coming for that. But I'm also thinking that the stock map sensor that reads pressure is causing an issue as well. So these AP1 map sensors max out at like 10 PSI. Some say 9.5, some say lower, especially if you have an older one. Could be flaking out anyways. So I went ahead and grabbed a OmniPower 3-bar map sensor, and we're gonna be installing that, and basically I have to do a full recalibration and fuel tune for that. So we're gonna be covering that in this video. And then while I was at Science Speed, I ended up picking up a 3.8 inch pulley going from a 4.2 inch pulley for the supercharger. So this will actually get me up to about 12.5 pounds of boost instead of 10. So if I'm still not hitting the target, we can throw this on. But I do need to install this new map sensor, also from Science of Speed, but it is a OmniPower one, just to make sure that once I do get over that 10 PSI threshold, we can actually read it in the ECU, and it's not just thinking it's at 9.5 PSI the whole time. That would be bad for fueling and timing, and then probably blow it up. So yeah, again, if you AP1 guys are trying to run over 10 PSI boost or like 9.5, getting dangerously close to that stock map limit, definitely upgrade that. And then I do with the Link ECU, drivability is fairly good, I would say. There are a couple scenarios where I do need to make some finer adjustments that the tuner didn't originally make. And I've been doing a lot of research and stuff, so I'm pretty confident that my changes are going to be beneficial. But I could always go back to a previous revision. So I'll show you guys what I'm doing for settings on that for drivability. The Link ECU is fairly easy to tune and set up after you really dive into the settings and understand the logic of the ECU itself and what it's doing. So pretty confident with that, and the fact that I've tuned other standalones, it's not too much different going from one to the other. So without further ado, let's get into the gauge issue. All right, so like I said, I hardwired this straight to the battery, the positive and negative, so should be getting a stronger power source. And I was actually able to configure all the parameters. So we've got AFR and target AFR, any fault codes from the ECU, fuel economy I can do, ignition timing, injector duty cycle, and the barometer on the ECU itself. We got knock count and the gauge pressure, manifold gauge pressure. This has to do with knock information. And we got intake temp, coolant temp, again, PSIG or gauge pressure, kind of like a boost gauge. And then the AFRs, and this is just a readout of coolant and air temps. All right, so next I wanted to cover some of the stuff that was going on with the tune and some revisions I made in the Link ECU. The first thing was changing to the 3-bar map sensors. So essentially I just go to analog inputs, map, and then change it to use my custom calibration here, which is a linear calibration, and that was going from the Honda 92 to 99 setting that was in their stock. And my calibration table, I have input values of 0.3 volts to 0.475. This other information I got was wrong on this side, so I don't even pay attention to that, but essentially it tells, you know, the ECU at certain voltages what the pressure is in kPa. So we got that all set up. Engine protection, I actually changed the rev limiter because I noticed in all my logs I was only hitting 8800 RPM. So I actually ended up changing this to 9100 RPM, which matches what they do in the Honda tuned as well. There is a 200 RPM buffer, I believe. So in the Link ECU, if you have your RPM limit set as standard, so not in advanced mode, it's going to have a 200 RPM buffer. So you really want to get your target about 1 to 200 RPMs higher. I'm going to start off at 9100. I'll probably raise this to 9200, so I actually hit 9000 RPM. And that's going to spin my supercharger a little bit faster and get a little more boost on the top end. So we got that taken care of. Overrun field cut, I was messing with a couple of settings because I had a little bit of issues with transient throttle on and off, and people in the forums were saying if you change this torque reduction introduction time to 1 second instead of half a second, it kind of smooths that out. And I also changed the amount of ignition retard as well. So essentially when you're on decel and below 0.4% throttle, going into the decel zone, it will start taking out timing to match the engine braking and make a smooth transition, if that makes sense. So your motor is going to be under compression only when you're on overrun fuel cut, and you want a nice smooth transition going into engine braking, especially in racing situations. The other thing I did was I noticed that there's a whole bunch of areas in the map where the lambda targets were not set to 1 lambda or 14.7 to 1 air fuel ratio during cruising. So I kind of lean that out in the cruising areas of the table. And then the last thing, I had injector duty cycle dead times from my injectors, and I plugged all that into the ECU because the original tuner never did that. Should help with battery voltage fluctuations or any kind of electrical load in maintaining the correct air fuel ratios as that bounces around, and getting the latency for the injectors for each one of those battery voltages. All right, so now the next thing there is to do after I'm switching map sensors is to build a mixture map. Now, mixture maps in Link ECU is pretty cool. You essentially drive around, take a log, and you pull up the mixture map, just right click to update the map, and essentially it pulls the data from the logs, and you can set up various filters and parameters here. So I set all that up, and it will correct your fuel tables. And because I have 2 fuel tables, one for VTEC and one for non-VTEC, I have to actually filter this data to filter out engine speed and TPS to make sure I'm not grabbing data from a field table that I'm not necessarily trying to tune at that time. So if I'm only trying to tune the low cam or non-VTEC, I would essentially set the engine speed filter to below 4,000 and TPS below 70, and then vice versa for the second fuel table. So that should get the fueling dialed in pretty quickly. Probably like a 30-minute driving log should get us there. But with all these changes here, I just want to improve drivability like I was saying earlier in the video. And if you guys are working on Link ECU stuff, this is some of the parameters to check and go over. Okay, we're gonna take the throttle body off next, and this gasket in between here was leaking when I did a boost leak test, and it was also leaking from the TPS. So, I forgot the company that makes it, but this is a refined gasket for the TPS that can actually hold boost. It's a little bit thicker. I think it's more of like a silicone material, it feels like. And then you got the old Honda paper gasket, which I'm gonna hopefully give this thing a better chance by putting some copper spray on it. I know these are mainly for like metal type gaskets, but I want to give that thing a chance to seal a little bit better. I should have just ordered the throttle body gasket from this company too, but I didn't see an AP1 S2000 one that they had on their website. So if this doesn't work out, I'll try to contact the seller and see if I can get one of this style. Okay, so I got the new gaskets on, put that copper RTV stuff on there just to be extra sure, and I got my new SOS map sensor. This gasket was still leaking, and I ended up putting like a bead of silicone on both sides of the gasket, hoping that would seal it a little bit better. I mean, it's not leaking terribly, but I just don't like any boost leaks whatsoever in the system. It's not ideal, so gonna let that RTV cure for a little bit, and then load the new settings in my ECU, and we'll see how it drives after that. All right, so this video is a little bit all over the place, but this might be some really helpful information Anyone that's working on the boosted S2000 runs into this. So I retuned the fuel table with my new map sensor, and everything was going really well. And I had the fuel corrections within like 0.5%, which is crazy. It was running super good. I didn't even have to turn on the closed loop fuel trims, and the car ran amazing. And all of a sudden, it didn't. And it started pulling a bunch of fuel, like maxing out the fuel correction, pulling up to 25%. So that led me to believe that either I had a stuck open injector. A lot of times these RC injectors are kind of garbage and fail after a short amount of time, or I had something fuel pressure related and fuel pressure was going through the roof. So two things. One thing that I found was this fuel pressure regulator. The top of it, if you have any kind of fuel coming out of there, and mine was actually wet coming out of the top nipple there where the vacuum line connects. If you have any fuel coming out of there, your fuel pressure regulator is bad. So what I'm thinking is mine got stuck closed, and fuel pressure went through the roof, and I was running crazy rich. The other thing is I heard a bunch of gurgling coming from my fuel tank, and doing some research with standalone ECUs. They don't control the purge valve for the tank vent anymore in the charcoal canister system. So I'm gonna end up getting underneath there and just venting the tank to the atmosphere, and getting rid of the whole charcoal canister. I'll show you guys how to do that in the next clip. But yeah, luckily my buddy Javi had a spare fuel pressure regulator off of his car that I'm gonna swap to, and I thought maybe it was map sensor too, so I'm borrowing that. But yeah, I think I was definitely having fuel pressure issues. I probably blew that out with just a little bit of boost going through there possibly. These fuel pressure regulators I think are good up to a Walbro 255, and then you gotta upgrade the fuel rail, and probably with like a radium setup or skunk 2 or something like that, because those stock fuel pressure regulators can't handle it. All right, and even NA, I had a random misfire with one of my coil packs. So I just decided to replace all the plugs and coils. These are actually K20 coils. You can actually see the part number right there. And they're about $40 a piece instead of the $120 piece for the AP1 coil packs. And these have a much better spark output. The other thing I did was went to a colder spark plug. The part number for that is this guy. So after the BK, the R8 is your heat range. So the 8th heat range. I could have gone 2 steps colder, but I think that's up to like around about 500 horsepower for the colder plugs. So make sure you pay attention to the charts on your specific vehicle, how much power you're running, and that way you can decide which heat range spark plug to use. Now, with spark plugs, if you you can actually read the temperature of your spark plugs by taking a look at the porcelain piece. So this one right here was actually a pretty good temperature. If it's too hot, I believe it'll turn white or start to get some weird corrosion here. And then if it's too cold of a spark plug, you'll actually get a lot of fouling, because if you're not in the right heat range with a spark plug, the spark plug can't do its self-cleaning job. So it needs to get to a certain temperature to clean all of the carbon off of that electrode. So little tip on spark plugs. Didn't really know about that stuff, heat ranges on plugs and everything, so now I do. And being a sort of learning tuner, it's good to know some of your client vehicles, what kind of plugs are running. So if you get any kind of breakup or misfire under idle conditions or under boost, you might have the wrong plugs in it. And then spark plug gap kind of plays into it as well. If you have too large of a gap on your plugs or running stock gaps and then you boost the motor, that can you can have a little bit of spark blowout or misfires in the higher RPMs. So yeah, little tip on that. All right, so for anybody that's following along and you want to delete the charcoal canister on your S2000, you're gonna need these two pieces. This is a rollover valve from like an off-road vehicle, or I guess like a 70s and 80s style truck usually has these. But there's a little ball inside, and if the vehicle rolls over, a bunch of gas won't dump out, but it does allow the tank to vent properly. And this is a 5/16 barb, so that's going to go on one of the fittings when we take off the charcoal canister. And then there's a second breather that has pretty much a 1-inch diameter hose on there, and that allows fresh air to come into the tank. So this is letting out gas vapors, and then this is letting air in. And you want sort of like a filter on both of these, so you don't get any crap in your gas tank, but inlet and outlet, that's what you're gonna need. All right, I don't know why Honda decided to make their charcoal canister setup super complicated on this car. There's like 3 electrical plugs, all kinds of vacuum lines and stuff. And here's the actual charcoal canister. And there's like some sort of surge tank, and I believe this is the purge valve. So yeah, a lot of stuff going on, but essentially after you take all this stuff out, there's really 3 lines you have to worry about. All right, so for reference, here's the rear axle, and it would have gone right here. And there's a breather line. This is the intake side, so when air needs to go back into the tank, when the tank is emptying of gas, you have this line. So you put the 1-inch breather on there. You have to actually Dremel off the little plastic connector, and then the diameter of that is 1 inch, and just kind of zip tie that out of the way. You could technically leave that line open, but crap and debris can go into your tank, so better put a filter on there. And then if you follow this line, smaller one, this is where the rollover valve is, and that'll actually vent the tank. So positive pressure coming out. And then there's a small vacuum line here that goes to a solenoid in the engine bay, and you just cap this off. Unless that valve is energized, no vacuum is actually going to go to this anyways, because it's turned off. And then you got a couple like connectors and stuff that you can zip tie out of the way, but not too worried about it, because there is the plate that's going to go back on. This little skid plate right here, so it'll protect all that anyways. So yeah, that's how you vent the tank when you have a standalone ECU on your S2000.